We're going to start our next session, and I'm very pleased to welcome both Dr. Nichol Allen, who is a assistant professor of museum studies here at Westminster College. It's a relatively new major, started a couple of years ago. We thought as a college, we have this wonderful museum and some extraordinary bright minds that we can use this museum and other collections on the campus as a laboratory to explore the idea of museums and what their role is. Because with these objects, as we've been talking about, the sculptures, the paintings, which we'll talk about in a minute, are only really valuable to us if displayed and talked about in appropriate context. And museum studies looks at that. And Nichol Allen is really, really an extraordinary dynamic professor. And she's joined by one of her star students, Carter Murray, who will talk a little bit about a project that they've been working on for the better part of this year. Nichol?
Yes.
Carter, thank you for being here.
Of course.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, good afternoon. Thanks for hanging out in a kind of warm church. It's better than being cold. So this is a project that Carter and myself have been working on this semester, and it's called Yalta at 80. And you know, because they're young and hip, we're gonna do the @ sign. The summit that shaped the world. I talk loud, so I feel bad for people having to control the mic, so I'm sorry. What I want to start with today is to tell y'all that what we are doing is we're going to peel back kind of what it takes to put in a museum exhibit together. So a lot of times we show up to museums and we can critique them. We say, oh, the text is too small, there's too much this, we don't like this. But when you really think about and peel back the layers, so much goes into it in planning and individuals. And so we kind of want to show you what that looks like. So next time maybe when you see a case, you go, oh, I could see how hard this might have been. And so here's our project. It's going to be an overview. I'm right there, so not in really a good place to see it. But I want to talk about our project scope. So this project examines the Yalta Conference through the lens of museum curation, analyzing its political discourses and diplomatic significance, marking the 80th anniversary of the conference in partnership with America's National Churchill Museum. Carter and I are developing an exhibit for George Washington University that highlights Yalta's lasting historical impact. This presentation offers insight to the curatorial process behind the exhibit's creation and how this conference's particular Yalta's legacy has shaped and continues to look at global perspectives. And what I think is super important is when we think about history, right, it matters. But one of the things is it never happens in a bubble, and it never is isolated. And I think one of the greatest things when we look at our discourses today, something like Yalta is still impacting us. And that's the part that Carter's really going to talk about as the million major student over here. One of his is in political science, and with that, it really shows how we can connect history, museum studies, and political science together, along with every other major in the world. Museums are super versatile. And so, I want to talk about first, what are some of the challenges museums face? Maybe it's the things that we don't really see that are underlining. And one of them is, of course, and I know this is something that's hit a lot of people hard, is funding. Funding is the hardest thing. Museum exhibits, for some reason, are not cheap. Cases are not cheap. Printing is not cheap. And so we have to think, when we start to create an exhibit, we're always bound by a budget. And so can our things and our dreams and our desires fit within that budget? Another part is time constraints. How much time do we have? We started this project in the fall semester. Spring. We started it in the spring semester. I never know what year it is. It's in the spring of this year. So we've been working on this for now over 4 months, right? And this is something that we're doing independently outside the museum with the help of the museum. So you have to think, we've taken that load off museum personnel and stuff like that, because that's a huge problem. Is trying to find that time that is there needed to facilitate the research and all of the things needed for an exhibit. Manpower, right? That's another one of the things that we look at. Do you have enough people in your museum to take the time to do the research? A lot of museums do not have large budgets. They don't have tons of staffing. And some of the most prominent museums in the world are very down to a very skeleton crew. So also, when you're creating an exhibit, you have to think of the museum's mission, right? Does this actually fit within the mission? So of course, Yalta, we kind of hit gold on that one with Churchill. So yes, we have this larger connection to the mission of the museum and how it can then stretch out larger into our communities. Also, we have to think about interpretation versus accuracy. So when we kind of think of different types of ways we can research, obviously Yalta's been written about in 1945, it's been written about in 1980, it's been written about in the 2000s. Whose narrative and whose dialogue do we consider? We have to consider all of them, right? We have to look at and listen to the voices and see what they're actually saying. Another part is space and design. How much space do we have? If you have one case, if you have a whole entire floor plan, these are things that we have to think about and consider when creating an exhibit. For example, a lot of people have, when you go to the World War I museum, there's tanks and airplanes. That takes up a lot of real estate, and they don't move, right? So we also have to think about permanence, what's gonna happen there. Also, audience engagement. So when we make something, are people gonna wanna come see it? And how do I make it engaging? Right? How are people gonna buy into Yalta? And especially for Yalta, this is gonna be a conference that not many people are gonna be aware of off the top of their head. So we have to get young people, older people, and everybody aware about this one event and how it still impacts us to this day. And when we think about audience engagement, if you are unaware, most people who go up to an exhibit, they only give it 15 to 30 seconds of their time. So I have to figure a way, right, to capture that audience. Every museum does. So also we know we're in an era where people are consuming TikTok videos, everything under a minute. So how do you engage people who are used to consuming fast micro bits of information and get them to stay and engage with your exhibit? Also educational needs, right? And at what level can you take this particular exhibit and put it back out into the community where you're looking at high schoolers? Can this also work for first graders? How can we take this one big event and make it and trickle it down to where it has value and use for our communities? And last, of course, relevance. Is Yalta relevant? And as we have discovered, it is still relevant today because we're gonna take you all the way up to 2025. So I want to take you into our next step is once Carter and I were like, what are we going to do? So we started with Lena and we worked in the archive. We said, let's just figure out, are we going to do every conference in the world ever done, right? So we looked at Potsdam, Yalta, and we started pulling all of these objects. And I was like, okay, no, this is too much. What are we going to do? So we started self-editing. And one of the things was, with that research, was finding what do we have? What can we sell? How can we make this marketable? And also, we're planning for a museum that's not even here. So how's that going to look? How's that going to resonate? Then we started to select artifacts. So once we decided Yalta, that's where we're going, and we decided let's do this, we started then deep diving all on the internet, see what's even out there outside of our museum, because we don't want to ever leave out this one treasure that's the greatest thing in the world. And I have a treasure with me today that you'll be able to see, and the handouts too will talk about that. And step 3, right, is obviously the installation. And unfortunately, one of the things that people don't see with museums is we think about it in our head. It's an idea. We're like, oh, it's going to look really great. And then we get there and we start to put stuff on walls. And I go, oh my gosh, this is so ugly. Or, oh my gosh, this doesn't work. Or, oh wow, it's too high. No one can read it. The font is too small. And so you never know about troubleshooting until the day of install. So make sure you thank your museum employees. We're quick on our feet and good thinkers. Or, for example, Tim would totally be able to speak to this. We had the passing of the Queen. What did we put up an exhibit in less than 6 hours, right? Because we have stuff, it's relevant, and we wanted people to know, oh, Churchill, the Queen, and so where should they come? They should come to the place here, so they can also be part of this larger dialogue of when the Queen passed. And so those are things like that. We're reactionary and we're fast. So I want to talk to you about this exemplar, what we handed out to you today. So it started in this. So there's this unassuming folder. It says Churchill sponsors on the side. Okay, well, what is that? Then it says Captain Gratteridge's diary, in which he recorded his experiences during the Yalta conference when he commissioned the Franconia and had Prime Minister Churchill and chiefs of staff on board. This was donated to us by Miss Claudia Lyon. She lives in New York. She also included memoirs and pictures of the ship. This is it. But if you just looked at the side, you go, well, what is that? I don't know, Churchill sponsors? That's not the right folder. And what we started looking at when we opened it up was why we decided to choose Yalta. Because in this particular folder is actually one of the letters you are looking at. So the letter that is on the very top that you can see, so when we have the Franconia was supposed to be, it's the ship on the back page, was supposed to be where the conference was going to be held and housed. They were going to put it on a ship. And if any of you have been on a ship or in the Navy, you know if you're going to have someone like a prime minister, a US president, and another political individual, it better be ship shape, No pun intended? None? No laughs? Thank you, Warren. I knew I invited you for a reason. And so when you look at these documents, he has the actual typed document here of the speech that Winston Churchill gave to the crew, right? And so what ended up happening is they said at the last minute, like most military things would happen, get off the ship, we're not gonna do it on the ship, we found a cave somewhere in the middle of nowhere and that's where we're gonna stay. And because of that, Churchill thought, gosh, all these men, all these women who are on the ship, who got it ready, got all the provisions, fixed all of the items, right? Had all of the accommodations ready for Churchill and all of the other dignitaries. They said, sorry, we don't need you anymore, goodbye. We're going somewhere else. But Churchill thought, I can't do that. I can't leave those types of impressions with these people. So he wrote them a really beautiful and delivered a speech. And if you read it in his speech, he's telling them, thank you for your time, thank you for your effort. And if you think about the things that we've done for very little accolades, very little appreciation, how important would that be as a sailor on that ship to hear that Winston Churchill was like, thank you. And then at the very bottom, of course, he knows what's important to sailors. He says, hey, you guys have a fun night on us, and made sure they had a few provisions themselves. But because of this document and because of this folder, we realized there was a larger story to tell, things that most of the people in the community are not purview to. So these are the treasures that hide within museums that exhibits like this get to bring out. So what was Yalta? I have that written down, just so I don't get it right? The Yalta Conference, held in February 1945, was a pivotal meeting between the leaders of the Allied powers, including Franklin Delano Roosevelt of the United States, Winston Churchill of the United Kingdom, and Joseph Stalin of the Soviet Union. Convened near the end of World War II, the conference aimed to shape the post-war world by discussing the reorganization of Europe, the fate of Germany, and the establishment of the United Nations. Though it marked a moment of cooperation, the decisions made at Yalta also had laid the groundwork for the Cold War tensions that followed. And while I teach a little bit of history, I had to turn this over to the one I thought knew way more about it, so don't get on to him if he doesn't know all the details, right? You got this. So we started with the timeline. Chronology is probably the best way to unpack and understand Yalta and its lasting impact. So Carter went through and decided to pick some 5 pivotal moments in each different sect of a decade to determine how Yalta is still impacting. And that's what I'm going to turn over to Carter to talk about.
Thank you, Dr. Allen, for that. It was a good description of Yalta. And so today I'm going to add on to that basically the 80 years after Yalta and how Yalta is still seen in history and how we can tie things back to Yalta that is still important. So the first thing I want to talk about is obviously the Iron Curtain speech. Happened right here on Westminster campus in our historic gym. So when Churchill was at Yalta, he was drawing a line in the sand of the West is going to have this side. They kind of created that East-West divide. But when he came to Westminster the next year, he got to really emphasize that and really bring it to life and tell the story about how the Iron Curtain is real, even though he already created the Iron Curtain. So it's kind of like self-promotion of like, he was there, he created it, and then he got to bring it to life and tell the whole world about it. So the Iron Curtain was obviously the one I chose out of the major 5 events. The UN at Yalta, the UN also, when they created the Security Council, this was the first time was the idea that they were going to be the 3 of the main powers on the Security Council at the UN, which I thought was very interesting, as they kind of already decided that without any other countries being present at that. So, in the 50s, obviously NATO forms in 49, and then in 52 it was expanded, strengthening the divide Churchill created, obviously more prevalently in the Iron Curtain speech, but also at Yalta, just kind of emphasizing that the West is united and we're going to fight back against the USSR, and kind of really formalizing that major divide early on after the post-war. In the 60s, the Berlin Wall was created to split East and West Berlin, really narrowing, obviously the West had controlled Western Berlin and Eastern Berlin was split, and really kind of laying in the ground where the line was, and it really manifests the ideological divide between the East and the West that was decided at Yalta. The 70s, obviously the end of the Vietnam War was a major loss for the U.S., and it was one of the first major losses during the Cold War. But it starts showing the outgrowing, the people started they wanted to go to more of the Eastern ideology, and kind of the West was starting to kind of lose a little bit in the sense of we had all this power. So it's kind of interesting to see Vietnam, the end of it, and how Vietnam was a proxy war that the USSR and the United States fought in a different country, and definitely just kind of that really strong divide between the states was tying it back to Yalta is very prevalent. The 80s. Reagan gave the evil empire, and it just kind of highlights more of what I was talking about in Vietnam, about how there was like the differences in the ideology and the moral opposition that he saw with the Soviets, and kind of really talked about how the Soviet Union was starting to kind of fail, and that we needed to ensure that the West was going to be there to kind of take their space when they were leaving, and they were falling. In the 90s, obviously, the USSR falls. Germany goes under reunification, which at Yalta, when we talked about it, they were dividing up Germany. They did not see Germany ever being reunified at Yalta. That was never a part of their plan, was to reunify Germany. It was just kind of keep it east and west and keep that strong line, the Iron Curtain, kind of in there. And so when Germany reunifies, it kind of defeats the agreement at Yalta. And it kind of really shows this, that Yalta is still prevalent in Germany, but they're kind of going against it. It's one of the first times that Yalta kind of gets thrown to the wayside, and it's irrelevant, and this like negotiation of reunifying Germany. But in the 2000s, we have lots of war, and I chose Russia invading Georgia, as Russia, obviously the former part of the USSR, they really try to gain their former states back, and they really are trying to get back to the sides of the USSR and their influence. And it invalidates the agreements at Yalta again about sovereignty and intervention. So when they were at Yalta, they talked about, what are we going to do when these countries become independent? They're like, give them their sovereignty, we're not going to intervene, we're going to let them be their own state. So when Russia starts coming into Georgia, we see them kind of like nullifying this agreement they made with the West, and it was really kind of prevalent as Vladimir Putin didn't really care anymore, and he was kind of just like disregarding what we'd already established in 1945. And then in the 2010s, NATO's response in 2016 to Russia's aggression, it represents the Cold War era lines first drawn at Yalta. So just kind of like NATO made a stance that we weren't going to stand for this anymore, and just kind of really making Yalta prevalent again as like, here's the East, here's the West, and we're not going to allow this anymore. Trying to protect the sovereignty and not letting Russia intervene in an independent state. And then obviously in the late, I guess next slide. In the 2020s, right now obviously Russia is still invading Ukraine. There's lots of fear with cyber attacks, stuff like that. But with Russia invading Ukraine after NATO had already kind of made their stance, it really challenges that sovereignty again and the protections that we enshrined in the post-Soviet, the post-Yalta conference. And I just think I picked these main ones that just really shows where like we drew the line, we drew like where the wall was going to be and all that stuff. But after a while, I mean, if you wouldn't have seen this, you'd been like, why is it relevant? But obviously, and so just kind of seeing those major events, and there's plenty more that I have on my slideshow, obviously, and it's in the back if you guys want to look at it more. But just kind of seeing where the East and the West really meet, and how Yalta really created that, and Churchill was smart, and he was able to create it, push it through, make a speech about it, and like tell the world what he did. So. Anything else?
Yeah, of course. I think one of the big things too, and I know Tim is a huge proponent of this, is when we think about legacy, right? We think about this thing, and if you look at our amazing marketing campaigns, we're talking about legacy, and we want people to remember Churchill and what's happened, but that it's not once again happening in a bubble, right? That we can continue on thinking about the things that even started here on this campus as the sinews of peace speech, that then still trickles down and still has an impact today, right? Those things that he learned at Yalta, he took and then he packaged them into a beautiful speech and re-represented them here that continues on. And while I think Carter makes a great point, this is a snippet, right? No one wanted to sit here for a history lecture. Maybe I think Dr. John did, but we sat here and heard this wonderful story about how something so small, right? So what we then had to do was take these big moments and then find artifacts, right? Whether they were letters, whether they were images, and try and then expand them bigger. So not only is the back end of doing the research concise, making it small, making it palpable for everybody to then think and chew on, right? Is that then we had to find the sources. And that's hard, right? We are in a very digital age, but not all of that is accessible. And so places like archives and reaching out to archivists, people like Lena, right? Like it's just been so helpful to say, we're gonna open our doors to you because the story you're telling is worth worth it. And these are some of the things that I think are so powerful about museums, especially today, right? We are in service to the public. We're in service to our communities. And the more we can do that, the longer we'll stay around, the more people will see there's a need for us. So just to let you know, because we want to leave it for questions, because I know there's so many books written on Yalta. I know there's so much information out there. We always want to make sure, I think questions are the best part, and I think you all have such amazing input. So in closing for us and examining the Yalta Conference through the lens of museum curation, this project not only brings history to life, but also invites reflections on its lasting global impact from 1945 all the way to 2025. By navigating challenges of storytelling accuracy, spatial design, audience engagement, and by following a deliberate curatorial process from research to installation, we created a timeline exhibit that bridges diplomacy and public history in partnership with America's National Churchill Museum, and it's going to be hosted at George Washington University. This work highlights how Yalta continues to shape our understanding of power, peace, international relations, and also what's so important is how we can take something so monumental like America's National Churchill Museum and still connect it back with our students and take their work and put it back out into the world. These opportunities don't happen, and Carter's super lucky. But for real, but this idea that having this opportunity is gonna stick with him forever compared to, you know, taking a test where you have to fill in the blank or do some circling or write an essay that goes nowhere. Experiential learning is what's at the foundation of museum studies and what we do to make history, political science, any discipline, right, really come to life. So thank you. That's not on here.
As Nicole said, questions are sometimes the most engaging and fun part, but I really disagree. That was really engaging and so much fun. Thank you both for that. But I will ask, are there questions from anyone?
No hard ones. No, Dr. John, I bet it's hard. Oh no, that's you.
Thanks, interesting presentation. Two questions. Is the exhibit at George Washington University going to be a static demonstration, or is there, if not, will there be an opportunity to bring part of it, for example, to here on a temporary basis? And then the second question is, I think it's fantastic that you're able to leverage the knowledge that the museum has to collaborate with other universities or on other projects that relate to Churchill. Do you envision or see other opportunities to collaborate with other universities in a similar fashion that you've collaborated with George Washington?
That's such a great question. So I'll address the first one is, the exhibit, its intent is to be installed so that it'll be available for the this year's International Churchill Conference that'll be held in Washington, D.C. in October. And what always our goal is the things that we send there can all come back here, right? And that way we can also then continue the cool legacy of Churchill here on the site. And there's things that we have here that are harder to send to other places, like we do have the hat from him being on, and that is here. And while his top hat is a beautiful piece, it's a hard piece to send. So there will be things that are unique to each place you go visit that really pulls on why you should come here, because now you can see the top hat. And there you might be able to see the documents. So I think that that's why, leading to your second one, collaboration is so important. Yeah, we are taking any collaborations, let us know. But it really is that idea of shared knowledge. It's amazing how much is in an archive. So most museums probably, nobody has a complete inventory of their items. It's just the way it is, sorry. We're perfect as we can be. But with that, sometimes something like this that's not digitized, and because Captain Guttridge had turned this into a book, he took his memoirs and made the book called The Queen's Captain, because he was part of the Queen Mary and the Queen Elizabeth. He was the captain for that. This exists here and only here. It's not digitized, it's not online, but unless we make exhibits like this, it then comes out of archives. Same with any archive, so that's why we always welcome collaboration. And all of us usually come from other institutions, as far as when we think about Dr. Glasgow, he's like, oh, I know somebody, and then you'll send me someone my way. So we've really used our own networking system to try and help grow and expand our museum projects with just making bigger connections. And Tim comes with lots of connections too. This is how we even got this project. And so those are the things that we open up, and as long as the dialogue stays open, we're always open to doing collaborations because it connects so many people.
And I can add, you are all collaborators, so if you have any good ideas, please let us know, because this is these kinds of exhibitions are job security for all of us, and it really is the best way to introduce the next generation to these stories. So please let us know if you have some ideas. Larry, it'd be great. Any other questions?
Don't you dare.
Some years ago, I started to hear the word curate.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden it appeared, we're going to curate. What from your perspective, what does curate mean with respect to presenting the Yalta conference? What does it mean for a museum to curate an event or a painting or something?
I know that we always come up with new buzzwords every year, but I think curate's no different than what we do every day, right? We curate our appearance, we curate our personal selves to the world, but it's the way in which we want to present our best self, and that's what we do, right? So with Yalta and curating it is, we're gonna say, we've done all the research, we're gonna put all this information together, and we're giving you the best product available. So when you walk into museums and you read panels, you're not like, lies, oh, that's a lie. You trust, because we are an authority. So I think curation for me is telling the public that we have curated the best truth, and we've done all the research to give you the best product possible. Just like when you got dressed this morning looking so handsome, Dr. John, you curated your best self.
As I said to you, I washed my face.
See?
Is it on?
Oh.
They were coming together, how they were to reshape the world. And in Churchill's mind and in Truman's mind, they were going to have respect for sovereignty. I'm wondering that Stalin went into the Yalta conference and he had no idea of respecting sovereignty.
Yeah.
Just an idea. Have you heard anything about that?
Yeah, so just kind of going into like the idea of like Vladimir Putin and like with like Russia now, it's kind of that same idea what you're saying is like they don't respect sovereignty and like kind of they want to intervene in every situation, to where the West kind of wants to protect sovereignty and like create independent states. So like what you're saying is like very what I presented on is kind of this very similar to what you're saying, and just kind of like the West wanted to protect sovereignty, create new independent states, and the East did not.
This is kind of a personal question. My great uncle, I think, was there with Roosevelt's staff at Yalta, and I just wondered: is there a personnel list or something that would confirm that? My father got letters from him about those places, which I don't have the letters now, but anyway, I would just be curious. Then he stayed in the. I don't know whether he was a military officer or whether he was just on the staff, but he was there, and he talked about, one of the things he talked about was that Roosevelt was in bad shape, and because of his health, and things like that would help place him there. And I just wondered if there was a way to find out about that. Somewhere there must be a list of personnel of his group. Whenever I look at one of these pictures, I think, I wonder if one of those guys in the background is related.
No, I think that's a great question, and I think a lot of us are really in tune to trying to seek out our history, and we've heard these stories. I was here, I saw that, and we've tried to capture a lot with people who were actually here to see Churchill come speak, right? And that was something, once time goes by, we lose those voices, but something so important, we've actually found manifests with names of attendees. I don't know if it's other than diplomats. I haven't looked to see, because for us it's just a list of names, unless it has, it was a lot of people from like Egypt and other countries. So until we search those down, but we do have a manifest of names. So if you give me your information, I can just scrub it and see if I find something. Yeah. No, not Warren. Oh no.
Thanks, Lena. Thanks, Nicole and Carter. I think you're absolutely right in highlighting the importance of objects. So this is a question for Nicole and Tim and Lena, if you want to join in. What would you say are the top 3 objects that you guys have got in your collection here at the museum?
So it's funny, I ask this question every time I go to a museum. I said, what's your favorite? That's the hardest question I've ever heard. And I go, okay. So I think the question is, what's your favorite object at the moment? Because when you get new things in, you're like, oh, this is my new favorite thing. But I wanted to hear Lena, since you're always elbow deep in items, what's your favorite object?
Yeah, I think right now my favorite is probably Jenny Jerome's morning parasol, which is actually on display in the Blenheim Temporary exhibit downstairs. It belonged to Winston Churchill's mother, Jenny Jerome, and due to the fact that it's black and some notes in our collection, we believe it's from one of her mourning periods, most likely her first husband, Winston Churchill's father. So that one's really cool to me personally.
Tim?
What about you, Tim?
That's a really tough question to answer, but I agree with Nichol. It shifts and changes depending on the moment. I think given the geopolitics of the day, the near final draft of the Iron Curtain speech that is here in our collection that shows Churchill's last-minute rhetorical flourishes and last-minute thoughts. I tell the students at Westminster they weren't the only ones who waited to the last minute to finish their papers. But that document really allows you to get inside Churchill's head, and I think it's extraordinary. You can listen to the speech, you can read the speech in a textbook or online, but if you see the speech written in prose style with the last-minute edits that his secretary took as dictation, that is an extraordinary document, and one we use with students and with teachers to really get inside Churchill's head. But the other one, of course, is the one we talked about earlier this afternoon, this building. You know, this building and the work we've been doing to preserve this building. It is, in many ways, an eyewitness to history and underscores the resilience that Churchill exhibited. You know, Churchill politically was out of office, in office, knocked him down, got back up. The same is true with this church. It seems to be that the phoenix of Aldermanbury, as it's sometimes called, always rises from the ashes, and we're doing that again today. So this church has always been on our mind, and it's been closed. The sanctuary, for those of you who don't know and haven't been here in a while, has been closed for a year, in large part because of the construction outside on the deck. This is really one of the first events we've had inside this space in a year. So today I would say perhaps this space which brings us all together.
Mine's a little more odd, but it is, and Lena knows because when we have student tours, I'm like, get the cool objects, but they're only cool to me. But one of them is this World War II medical kit, but it's for doctors, like field surgeons, and I love the idea because it talks about history, right? It's metal. Why is it metal? Because they used to bake them to try and sterilize them. But my favorite is when we do school tours, I pull out different objects. I'm like, what is this for? And so there's a tracheotomy piece in there, and then there's catheters. And so I hand them around, and the kids are like, yay! And I was like, what are those? And they're like, I don't know, for blood pressure. I'm like, it's a catheter. And then I go, do you know what that is? And they go, and then one student will know, and then they all drop it. And I say, you don't want to pass it around? And they're like, that was so gross. I go, it was only probably used twice. Don't worry about it. But I think those things that then now those students are going to go home and be like, someone made me touch a catheter. But I love that idea that because it's metal and because it is so strong, it is something that students and people can still touch and hold. And when we have so many fragile things we can't let go. So I love this idea that now students are sitting there and they're like, woo, and they're like, oh. So I like kind of seeing that visceral reaction to the do not touch, right, museum objects for them to go, oh, this was something I got to touch. But they probably don't appreciate me for it, but they got to touch it.
And I think a gentleman in the back had a question after this, but I have an anecdotal story that most people here don't know about. It ties Churchill Museum, University of Missouri, Channel 8 in Columbia, and Yalta. A number of years ago, we got wind that there was a commuter airline that flew from St. Louis Lambert to Columbia Regional Airport and back and forth with passengers. I don't know the name of the airline. It was a DC-3 plane, and the DC-3 plane log said it was part of the British entourage that took the British group to Yalta. And so the plan was Channel 8 came over here, and we asked the pilot to fly over St. Mary, Aldermanbury, so they could videotape that. Well, the pilot was he had passengers. He flew way north. It was a spot in the air flying by, and he went and landed in Columbia. We called the airport and said, you weren't close enough. That wasn't a good shot. Fly over the church. So I climbed up in the tower and watched. It looked like a bombing run. The plane came straight over, and we got to find that video at Channel 8.
Okay.
Flew directly over from the west to the east, over the church. Can you imagine being a passenger on the plane? After he got past us, he made a big swing around and came from the north and flew from the north to the south and then went back to St. Louis. That's a great anecdotal story. And I think there's somebody else.
Anyone?
Okay. Anyone? Any other questions? Oh, wait.
This is rather subjective, Nicole, but do you think the history that you all portrayed excellently of the last 80 years provides a roadmap for a future foreign policy that seems to be struggling on what our path forward should be?
Thanks for giving me a loaded question, but it's hard because the whole, if we don't learn history, we're doomed to repeat it. Well, we always repeat history. That's not new. I think if somebody, a particular political person could learn from this and advocate, but the forces of politics is so strong, so many voices, so many people, that one person taking something like Yalta to say, look, we can learn from this. And I mean, think about Churchill giving a Sinews of Peace speech. Even the president was like, oh, I didn't commission that. I don't know what that was. So even when people try and stand up for something they truly believe in, your voice can get muddled, even if you're a powerful voice. And so I think we can only keep providing stories like this to help, but we also have to beg people like you to come see them in our museums and come be changed by them. So when we can figure out how to get people to get the knowledge and be changed, it's going to be hard. But I think it's always, you can't think of everything as abysmal and not great. So I think that there is something to be learned. It'll keep people like me and Dr. Bolton employed. We keep teaching history, and we hope that our young people and our students keep taking these stories and then taking them with them. Carter wants to be a lobbyist in his life. That's his dream, right? Well, I'm like, wow. But that idea that him being here and doing this and being on this campus, having all of these direct contacts with Churchill, Sinews of Peace, and being part of this larger project, hopefully that informs him to make great decisions and become the best lobbyist, right? Maybe.
Well, thank you again, Carter and Nichol. Thank you, Carter and Nichol.
Yeah, we appreciate y'all. We'll be around if you need us.
And all the slides are in back in the easel if you would like to see it up close.